Daniel lived alone in a small wooden house at the edge of a quiet forest. His life had become slow and silent after his dog Rex went missing 2 weeks ago. Rex was not just a pet to him. Rex was the only friend Daniel had. Every morning Daniel woke up and checked the yard, hoping his dog would appear. Every night he listened for footsteps at the door. But Rex never came. The silence of the house felt heavy. Daniel stopped talking to people and kept thinking about the day Rex disappeared during a storm. He blamed himself for letting the dog wander too far. He believed he had lost his only companion forever. One cold night something strange happened. Daniel was sitting on the old couch half asleep when he heard a soft scratching sound at the front door. At first he thought it was the wind pushing a loose branch, but the sound came again, slower this time. Daniel froze. For 2 weeks he had imagined this exact sound. His heart beat fast as he stood up and walked toward the door. He did not want to feel hope again, because hope had hurt him before. But the scratching continued. Something was waiting on the other side. Daniel opened the door, and his breath caught in his throat. Rex stood there covered in dust scratches and dry mud. The dog looked tired, as if he had walked for miles through rough ground. Daniel dropped to his knees and hugged Rex tightly. His eyes filled with relief. He kept saying, "Rex came back. Rex is safe now." But then Daniel noticed something else. Rex was not alone. A tall figure stood behind the dog in the cold darkness. It was a woman, but not human. Her skin had a pale silver glow like moonlight on water. Her eyes were large, soft, and full of sadness, as if she had lost more than Daniel could understand. She wore torn clothing made of a strange fabric that shimmered faintly under the porch light. She looked weak and scared, yet she did not step back when Daniel looked at her. She only stood there in silence, as if waiting for something. Daniel slowly stood up. He did not move too fast because he did not want to frighten her. Rex walked between them and nudged Daniel with his nose. The dog was acting different. Instead of running inside like before, Rex kept pushing Daniel toward the woman, as if he wanted Daniel to understand something important. Daniel knew Rex well. The dog never acted without a reason. If Rex trusted this alien woman, then something serious must have happened in the forest. Daniel spoke in a calm voice. He told her he did not want to harm her. She tilted her head slightly, like she understood the tone, even if she did not understand the words. Her hands shook a little, and Daniel saw a soft glowing mark on her wrist. It looked like a symbol, not a wound. It pulsed with a slow light, almost like a heartbeat. Suddenly, Rex turned toward the forest and growled. Daniel looked into the trees. They seemed darker than usual. A cold feeling spread in the air. Something was out there. Something that made Rex nervous. Daniel did not know what it was, but the alien woman clearly feared it. She kept glancing toward the forest with wide, frightened eyes. Her breathing grew fast. Daniel felt his own heartbeat quicken. The night was too quiet. Even the wind had stopped. Daniel made a quick choice. He told her to come inside. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward slowly. He guided her into the living room while Rex stayed close beside her. She walked with unsteady steps, as if she had been running for a long time. Daniel offered her water. She accepted it with shaking hands. When she drank, a soft glow spread across the markings on her arms. Daniel guessed she was exhausted and dehydrated. Rex stood guard in front of the door. He listened to every sound outside. Daniel realized the dog had returned not by chance, but because he had found the woman and brought her here for help. Something had forced her into the forest. Something dangerous enough to chase her across unknown places until Rex found her. Daniel asked her where she came from, but she only listened. She tried to speak, but her voice came out as soft, broken sounds. She placed her hand on the floor and traced a shape in the dust. It looked like a symbol of a planet, or maybe a home. Then she touched her heart and pointed toward the forest where she had come from. Daniel understood that she had lost her family. She was alone now, just like he had been since Rex went missing. Rex suddenly barked sharply. Daniel looked outside through the window. He saw faint lights moving between the trees. They were not flashlights. They were not car lights. They moved too smoothly, floating instead of shaking. The alien woman stepped back, trembling. She knew what those lights meant. Daniel did not, but he knew he could not let fear control him. His dog had brought her here for a reason. Something in the forest wanted her, and it was getting closer. Daniel locked the door and pulled the curtains shut. Rex pressed against the door, ready to defend his home. The alien woman stood near the fireplace, breathing hard. Daniel realized that tonight was not just about his dog returning. Tonight was the beginning of something far bigger, something dangerous, something that would pull him into a world he had never imagined. And it all started with a single scratch at the door. Asterisk. Inside the small wooden house, a strange quiet filled the room. The alien woman stood near the fireplace, trying to warm her shaking hands, while Daniel watched her with worried eyes. Rex stayed close to her, as if guarding her from something only he understood. Daniel had seen fear in people before, but the fear in her eyes was different. It was deeper and heavier, like she carried a whole world's pain on her shoulders. Daniel tried to speak gently. He asked if she was hurt. She did not answer with words, but slowly lifted her arm, showing the glowing symbol near her wrist. The light inside the symbol flickered, as if reacting to her emotions. Daniel did not know what the symbol meant, but he could tell it was not a simple mark. It felt important to her, maybe even sacred. She touched it softly with her other hand, and then pointed toward the night sky, as if trying to explain something Daniel could not yet understand. Rex nudged her leg gently. She knelt down and placed her hand on his head. The dog relaxed instantly. Daniel noticed something surprising. She understood Rex better than she understood him. It was as if she and the dog shared a silent language that did not need words. When Rex moved, she followed. When he growled, she stepped back. When he sat, she also rested her hands on her knees. Daniel felt a strange sense of connection growing between them, like Rex had chosen to protect her. Daniel brought her a blanket. When she touched it, her fingers trembled with relief. She wrapped it around her shoulders and sat on the floor motionless for a moment. Daniel placed a bowl of warm soup in front of her. She tasted it carefully, as if it was the first real food she had in a long time. Her eyes softened for a second, and she nodded to thank him. But soon the fear returned. She kept glancing toward the window, listening to every distant sound. Daniel knew she was running from something, but he did not know what. He sat down across from her and spread dust on the wooden floor. He drew a simple shape of a person. She watched him closely. Then he pointed at himself. She understood and nodded slowly. Next he drew a small shape of Rex. She smiled faintly and touched the drawing. Then Daniel pushed the dust toward her, encouraging her to draw something. She hesitated, but then she placed her finger down and created a symbol of a large circle. Inside the circle, she drew a smaller glowing shape with her finger. The dust sparkled when she touched it. Daniel knew this was not normal dust. Something about her energy made it shine. She pointed at the circle, then pointed at herself. Daniel understood she was showing him her home world. Then her hand shook as she added another shape outside the circle. A dark shape with long lines around it. When she finished it, she backed away from the drawing and lowered her head. Daniel could see the pain in her eyes. That dark shape was something dangerous. Something that attacked her home. Something that forced her to run. Something that killed her family, because now Daniel realized she was not just an alien woman. She was a widow. Her partner was gone. Her world was under attack. She was the only one left. And now whatever destroyed her life was coming through the forest, looking for her. Rex growled again. Daniel stood up quickly. The strange lights outside were moving slower now, like they were searching carefully. Daniel closed all the lamps, leaving only the soft glow of the fire. The alien widow walked closer to him and placed her hand on his arm. She tried to speak, but the sound that came out was broken and filled with sadness. She pointed at her chest, then pointed toward the forest again and again. Daniel understood she was trying to warn him. The danger was not far. They were already tracking her. Daniel whispered that she was safe here. She did not understand the words, but she understood his tone. For the first time, her breathing slowed a little. She looked at him with tired eyes. In that moment, Daniel felt a heavy responsibility settle on him. He had lost Rex once, and it broke him. Now Rex had brought this widow into his life, and she needed someone to protect her. Daniel could not ignore that. Rex suddenly barked louder. The alien widow grabbed Daniel's sleeve in fear. The lights outside paused as if they sensed movement. Daniel stepped in front of her. He did not know who or what was out there, but he knew he could not let them take her. Tonight his quiet, lonely world had changed forever, and the real danger was only beginning. The night grew colder as the strange lights moved slowly between the trees. Daniel stood near the window with his breath held while Rex pressed his body against the door, ready to defend the house. The alien widow stayed close behind Daniel. Her hands were shaking, and her eyes kept flicking toward the lights outside. Daniel did not know what hunted her, but he could feel a heavy presence in the forest, like something alive and searching. Daniel stepped away from the window and motioned for her to sit down. She lowered herself to the floor, but her gaze never left the shadows outside. Rex walked to her side and rested his head on her knee. She placed a gentle hand on his fur and whispered a soft sound filled with sadness. Daniel realized she trusted Rex completely. Wherever she had come from, something in her heart believed that Rex had saved her life. Daniel wanted to understand what she was running from. He picked up a piece of charcoal from the fireplace and drew a line on the wooden floor. The widow leaned forward, watching closely. He made a simple drawing of his forest, then drew small circles to show the strange lights outside. She stared at it for a moment, then slowly placed her finger on the drawing and traced over the circles. When she lifted her hand, the circles glowed faintly. Then she added 3 strange shapes. Each shape had long, thin arms and hollow centers. When she finished, her hand fell to her lap as if the memory hurt her. Daniel looked at the shapes. They did not look like animals. They looked like creatures with clear purpose. She pointed at the shapes, then touched her own chest with trembling fingers. She closed her eyes as if remembering something terrible. Daniel understood at once. These creatures had destroyed her family. They had chased her across her world. They had followed her into his forest. And now they were outside searching for her again. Another low growl came from Rex. Daniel looked outside and saw more lights between the trees. They were not bright enough to look like search lamps. They were soft floating spheres that drifted slowly like insects with intelligence. They moved together in a pack. It was clear they were tracking something. Daniel felt a cold shiver run down his arms. The creatures were getting closer. The widow touched the glowing mark on her wrist. It pulsed with a soft blue light. Daniel realized this mark was not decoration. It was part of her connection to these creatures. Maybe they hunted her because she carried something valuable. Or maybe the mark allowed them to track her. Daniel wanted to ask, but he did not know how to communicate with her. Beyond simple drawings, she suddenly stood up and walked toward the door. Daniel quickly stepped in front of her, afraid she would run outside. She shook her head and pointed downward. Daniel understood she wanted to hide somewhere deeper inside the house. He guided her toward the basement door. It was an old space where Daniel kept tools and boxes from his father's time. The stairs creaked as he led her down. Rex followed carefully, sniffing every corner. The basement was cold, but safer than the living room. Daniel lit a small lantern. Shadows stretched across the old stone walls. The widow looked around nervously, but she did not resist. She sat down near a stack of wooden crates and wrapped the blanket tight around her shoulders. Rex lay beside her like a loyal guard. Daniel knelt next to them and listened. Above them, the house was silent, but outside he could still hear faint humming sounds. The creatures were still searching. Minutes passed slowly. Daniel felt the weight of fear inside his chest. He was just an ordinary man. He had no plan, no weapon, no understanding of alien threats. But he had one thing that mattered. He could not abandon someone who needed help. Not after losing Rex once. Not after seeing the widow's fear. He knew he had to protect her even if the danger was far beyond anything he had faced before. The widow raised her hand and touched Daniel's arm gently. She drew a small circle in the air and then a short line breaking through it. He did not understand, but she repeated the gesture. Her eyes spoke the meaning. She had nowhere else to go. Her world was broken. Her family was gone. And the creatures outside were hunting her until the end. Daniel nodded slowly. He promised her with his eyes that she would not face the creatures alone. Rex lifted his head and barked once as if agreeing. Above them, a sudden sharp sound echoed across the living room floor. The lights outside stopped moving. The creatures had sensed something. And now their hunt was closing in. The sharp sound above the basement made Daniel freeze in place. It was not the sound of a branch or the wind. It was heavier and carried purpose. The alien widow pressed her hand over her mouth to hold back a gasp. Rex stood up instantly with his ears pointed toward the stairs. Something had entered the yard. Something was moving with slow, careful steps as if it already knew the house was hiding someone. Daniel quietly climbed a few steps and opened the basement door just a little. He looked through the thin gap. A soft glow filled the living room. It was not coming from inside the house. It was seeping through the windows from outside like glowing fog. The creatures had reached the porch. Their lights pushed shadows across the floor in strange patterns. The widow trembled. She placed her glowing wrist close to her chest as if trying to hide the mark. Daniel noticed the mark was reacting. It flickered faster every second. Maybe it worked like a signal. Maybe the creatures used it to track her. Daniel knelt beside her and gently covered the mark with the blanket. The glow softened but did not disappear completely. Rex growled again, but Daniel placed a hand on his collar, calming him. They could not make any noise. Not now. Not when the enemy stood almost at their door. Daniel motioned toward the back of the basement. There was a small broken window at ground level facing the forest. He crouched beside it and peeked outside. He saw 3 floating lights moving in a slow pattern. They searched the ground as if reading invisible tracks. The creatures themselves were hidden behind the lights. He could not see their bodies, but he felt their presence. Every instinct in his body told him these things were not animals. They were intelligent hunters. Daniel moved back to the widow. She lifted her hands and tried to explain something through gestures. She drew a circle in the air, then tapped the ground. Then she pointed to the glowing mark on her wrist. Daniel understood she was trying to say that the creatures were drawn to her energy. Her mark acted like a beacon. They would not leave until they captured her. Daniel knew hiding in the basement would not be enough. If the creatures searched the house, their strange lights would expose her within seconds. They needed to move. They needed a distraction. Something that would pull the creatures away from the house long enough for them to escape into the forest. He looked at Rex. The dog seemed to understand before Daniel even spoke. Rex walked to the basement door and waited. Daniel nodded slowly. Rex had survived alone in the forest for 2 weeks. He knew how to move without being caught. He could lead the creatures away if needed. But Daniel hated the idea of risking him again. The widow reached out and touched Rex's face. Her eyes filled with a sorrowful respect. She knew the dog had saved her once. She feared he would try to save her again, even if it cost him everything. Daniel opened the basement door silently. He stepped into the living room, and Rex followed. The widow stayed hidden below. Daniel peeked outside through a small gap in the curtains. The floating lights moved across the yard, drawing closer to the windows. Their movement was smooth, almost mechanical. Daniel took a deep breath and grabbed his flashlight from the shelf. He knew what he had to do. He opened the back door just enough for Rex to slip out. The dog ran silently into the trees, his body low to the ground. Daniel waited a moment, then switched on his flashlight and pointed it toward the opposite side of the forest. He waved it once, then twice. The beam cut across the darkness like a signal. The floating lights reacted instantly. They turned in Daniel's direction. Then they drifted away from the house, following the movement. Daniel closed the door and rushed back to the basement. He whispered that they had only a short time to escape. The widow stood up weakly, holding the blanket around her shoulders. Her glowing mark flickered again. Daniel lifted her arm gently and tucked the blanket tighter, hoping to keep the light hidden. Rex barked once in the distance, a short signal telling Daniel he was safe for now. Daniel helped her up the stairs. The house was dim and still, but the danger outside was real. They slipped out the back door into the cold night. The forest waited ahead. Deep, dark, thick with shadows. But it was their only chance. Daniel held her hand, and Rex's faint barks guided them from a distance. Behind them, the lights searched the wrong direction. Ahead of them, the forest opened into a path Daniel knew well. The hunt had begun, and now, survival depended on how fast they could run. Daniel guided the alien widow through the dark forest with quick, careful steps. The night air felt heavy, and the trees whispered with every distant movement. He kept listening for Rex's signal barks. The dog stayed ahead of them, leading the creatures away in short bursts of sound, then disappearing into silence again. Daniel trusted Rex's instincts more than anything. Right now, that trust was keeping all of them alive. The widow struggled to keep up. Her steps were weak and unsteady. The blanket around her shoulders dragged across the ground. Daniel supported her with one arm while holding a small lantern in his other hand. Its soft light lit the narrow path, but also reminded Daniel they could not stay in the open for long. The creature's floating lights still moved somewhere behind them. He could see faint glimmers through the trees. They were far, but not far enough. Daniel whispered that he knew a place to hide. She looked at him with tired, confused eyes, but nodded. Her glowing wrist mark was covered, yet still pulsed faintly. Daniel feared the creatures might sense it again. They needed a deeper hiding place. Something underground and protected. Then he remembered the abandoned mine. The old mine lay on the west side of the forest. Daniel had explored it many years ago when he was a teenager. It was dark, cold, and half collapsed, but it had tunnels that twisted far into the hillside. Few people visited it now. Most avoided it because of old warnings about unstable walls. But tonight that danger was a blessing. The creatures would not expect them to go inside something so broken and hidden. Daniel tightened his grip around the widow's arm and guided her toward the mine trail. The path was rough. Roots rose from the ground like claws, while sharp stones pressed against their feet. The widow stumbled and almost fell, but Daniel caught her quickly. Her breath came out in short, weak gasps. She was losing strength fast. They reached a small clearing where the trees opened slightly. Beyond it stood the entrance of the mine. The wooden support beams were cracked and leaning to one side. Moss covered the stones. Cold air drifted from the tunnel like a slow ghost. The widow stopped and stared. She seemed afraid, but then she sensed the lights behind them growing brighter. That fear pushed her forward. Rex suddenly appeared from the bushes, panting heavily. His fur was dusty and his paws trembling from running. He moved straight to Daniel and nudged his arm. Daniel understood the message. The creatures were close again. Very close. Daniel led the widow inside the mine. The ground felt uneven and loose beneath their feet. A thin mist filled the air, making it colder. Rex walked beside the widow while Daniel lit the lantern brighter. The old rock walls shone faintly. The widow placed her hand on one of the stone pillars, and the glowing mark on her wrist reacted. A soft blue light spread across the rock for a moment, then faded. Daniel stared in surprise. The mine walls were responding to her energy. The widow watched her own hand with confusion, but there was no time to understand it right now. They needed to go deeper. They moved carefully into a wider chamber. Broken tools lay scattered on the ground. Old wooden carts stood frozen in place. Daniel remembered exploring this area when he was younger, but it felt different now. It felt alive with a strange presence. The widow pressed her back against the wall, breathing slowly, trying to recover her strength. Rex growled again, low and warning. Daniel turned toward the entrance. Faint lights shimmered outside. The creatures had followed their trail. Daniel grabbed loose boards and pushed them against the entrance. Dust filled the air as he created a rough barrier. It would not hold the creatures for long, but it would slow them. The widow touched the stone again. This time the crystal embedded inside the rock glowed softly. Daniel saw it clearly. There were minerals inside the mine that reacted to her energy. She turned to him and pointed at the crystal, then at her chest. She was trying to say something important. Something about her ability. Something about these crystals. Maybe her family had once protected crystals like these. Maybe her world had the same minerals. Maybe that was why the creatures hunted her. She carried knowledge or power connected to them. Before Daniel could think further, a strong vibration shook the entrance. The boards cracked. The floating lights outside grew brighter. The creatures were at the door. The widow stepped forward weakly and placed both hands on the large crystal. Her wrist mark glowed brighter than ever. A soft wave of blue energy spread across the chamber. The walls lit up. The ground vibrated. The floating lights outside flickered, as if confused. The creatures hesitated. Daniel grabbed her arm and guided her deeper into the mine. They had only a few moments before the creatures recovered. But for now the widow's strange power had bought them a chance. They disappeared into the tunnels, guided by the faint glow of the crystals, while the forest behind them echoed with frustrated hunting cries. Asterisk. The deeper Daniel and the widow moved into the old mine, the colder the air became. The walls glimmered with faint crystals buried inside the dark stone. Rex stayed close to the widow, never moving more than a few steps away. He seemed to sense her weakness and guarded her like a loyal protector. Daniel held the lantern high, trying to see the path ahead. The mine tunnels twisted like a maze. Some paths were blocked by fallen rocks, while others led into darkness that swallowed the light. The widow walked with slow, careful steps. Her breathing was uneven, and her legs trembled from exhaustion. Still she kept moving because she knew the creatures would not stop. She touched the wall again, and the glowing mark on her wrist pulsed with light. Daniel watched the stone react. A bright blue shimmer passed through the crystal veins inside the wall. It was beautiful, but also strange. The mine felt alive in her presence. Rex barked softly and stepped forward. He guided them toward a larger tunnel on the right. Daniel recognized it. This tunnel led to a chamber he had visited long ago. It was a place where the biggest crystals in the mine grew. If the widow's energy connected with the crystals, then this chamber might help her. Or it might reveal something that Daniel still did not understand. They reached the chamber after a long, slow walk. The space opened like a hidden hall under the earth. Hundreds of crystal formations rose from the floor, and walls glowing faintly with a blue-white light. The widow stepped inside and stopped in awe. Her eyes softened as she looked around. Daniel realized the chamber reminded her of something familiar, maybe a place from her world. She walked to the largest crystal at the center. Its surface shimmered as she approached. When she placed her palm on it, the entire room changed. Light spread across the walls, forming soft waves like ripples on water. The crystals hummed with a low, gentle tone. Daniel felt the vibration through the air. Rex sat down near the widow, as if understanding the importance of the moment. Daniel stepped closer and spoke softly. He asked what she was trying to do. She turned to him with tired eyes, then raised her hand and drew a symbol in the air. It was the same symbol she had drawn in the dust earlier, a symbol of her world. Then she added another mark, a spiraling shape leading upward. Daniel understood she wanted to create a signal, something to reach her people. She placed both hands on the crystal. This time the glowing mark on her wrist brightened so much that Daniel had to squint. The crystal responded with a strong pulse of blue light. A shockwave spread across the room, shaking dust from the ceiling. The mine groaned as if waking from a long sleep. Daniel stepped back in fear, but the widow stood still, her face calm, even though her body trembled. Rex let out a warning bark. Daniel turned toward the tunnel. The floating lights of the creatures appeared again. They had found the mine entrance and were now searching through the tunnels. Their soft humming echoed off the stone walls. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. The creatures were closing in. If they discovered the chamber, the widow would not survive another chase. The widow's glowing mark flickered again. She was losing strength fast. The signal she was sending was draining her energy. Daniel moved to her side and held her shoulders, trying to keep her steady. The crystal dimmed for a moment, then brightened again as if responding to her determination. Suddenly, the mine shook with a heavy impact. One of the creatures had struck the entrance to the chamber. Bits of rock fell from the ceiling. Rex growled fiercely, standing in front of Daniel and the widow. The floating lights entered the chamber, slowly shining across the crystals like ghostly eyes. Daniel could not see the creatures clearly, but he felt them. Their presence was cold, sharp, and filled with hunger. The widow looked at Daniel with fear, yet also hope. She placed her hand on his chest, then pointed toward Rex. Then she pointed up toward the surface. Daniel understood. She wanted him to escape while she finished the signal. She believed staying behind was her duty. But Daniel shook his head. He would not leave her. Not after everything she had survived. Not after Rex had brought her into his life. The creatures stepped closer. Their lights flickered. The widow touched the crystal one last time. A final wave of bright light shot through the chamber, hitting the creatures. They staggered back, disoriented. The crystal hummed loudly, then dimmed as the widow collapsed into Daniel's arms. He held her tightly. She was still breathing, but barely. The signal was sent. Now they needed to escape before the creatures recovered. Daniel lifted her gently, and Rex led the way back through the tunnels. The mine walls trembled behind them as the creatures roared in frustration. The widow had revealed her hidden power. And now that power had awakened something far beyond the mine. Daniel carried the alien widow through the twisting tunnels with careful steps. Her body felt lighter than he expected, as if the energy burst from the crystal had drained almost everything inside her. She rested her head against his shoulder with her eyes half closed. Her breathing was soft but unsteady. Daniel held her tight, fearing that if he let go even for a moment, she might fade away completely. Rex ran ahead, pausing every few steps to check the path. The mine echoed with distant rumbling, but the creatures were no longer chasing them. The widow's final burst of power had stunned them, long enough for escape. The tunnels grew darker as they moved away from the crystal chamber. Daniel's lantern flickered, but held its glow. The widow stirred in his arms and opened her eyes just a little. She looked up at him with a weak but grateful expression. Her fingers curled around the edge of his sleeve. Daniel whispered that she would be safe. She did not understand his words, but she understood the gentle tone. She let her eyes close again, trusting him completely. They reached the mine entrance after what felt like hours. Cold night air rushed toward them, carrying the smell of pine and damp earth. Rex barked softly, signaling that the area outside was clear. Daniel stepped out into the forest, holding the widow close. The moon hung low in the sky, casting silver light across the trees. The floating hunting lights were nowhere to be seen. Either they were still trapped inside the mine, or they had retreated after the energy. Burst shook the tunnels. Daniel began walking toward a hill at the far edge of the forest. It was a place where the trees opened into a wide clearing. He hoped the signal she sent would bring someone from her world. The widow slowly lifted her hand and pointed toward the sky. Daniel followed her gesture and understood. She believed her people had received the signal. They needed to reach open ground where a ship could land. The walk to the hill was slow. Daniel stopped several times to let the widow breathe. The journey had taken all her strength. Still she held on, gently squeezing his sleeve whenever she woke. Rex stayed beside her with quiet loyalty. Every time she moved, Rex nudged her legs softly as if telling her she was not alone. When they reached the clearing, the widow asked to stand. She tapped Daniel's arm and motioned for him to lower her to the ground. Daniel hesitated, but she insisted with a weak nod. He helped her stand and supported her as she faced the sky. Her glowing wrist mark flickered again, but much softer now. She lifted her hand up and closed her eyes. For a moment nothing happened. The forest was silent. The wind did not move. Even Rex stood perfectly still. Then a faint hum floated down from the clouds. Daniel looked up. A thin blue light appeared high above them. It grew brighter until a sleek silver shape descended slowly through the sky. The light surrounded the clearing like a soft shield. Daniel stepped back in shock. The widow opened her eyes and let out a quiet breath of relief. Her people had arrived. The ship landed without sound. A door opened and two figures stepped out. They were from her world, clearly shown by their glowing markings and gentle movements. Their eyes filled with sadness when they saw her condition. They approached her slowly with respect. She reached out her hand weakly, and one of them supported her with careful care. Daniel felt a sudden ache in his chest. He knew this moment meant goodbye. He had protected her. He had risked everything to keep her alive. And now she would leave his world forever. The widow turned back to Daniel and Rex. Her eyes glistened with emotion. She placed her hand over her heart, then extended it toward him. It was her way of saying thank you for giving her hope when she had none left. Rex walked up to her and pressed his head against her knee. She stroked his fur softly for the last time. The other alien lifted a small crystal from a pouch and offered it to Daniel. It glowed with a pure blue light, a symbol of gratitude, a reminder that their bond would not be forgotten. The widow stepped onto the ship, supported by her people. Before the door closed, she looked at Daniel one last time. Her expression carried peace, not fear. She had found safety again. She had found a future. The ship rose into the sky and disappeared into the stars. Silence returned to the clearing. Daniel stood still for a long moment. Rex nudged his leg, gently looking up at him. Daniel smiled softly and placed a hand on Rex's head. His dog had not just returned home. Rex had guided him to a life-changing purpose and given a lost widow a second chance among the stars. And in Daniel's heart, the forest no longer felt empty.